Yashodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jai Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Jai Radha Jai Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Viष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्रीमद ऐसी भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्री प्रभुपाद की एवं विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्रीमद ऐसी भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्री प्रभुपाद की एवं विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती ठाकुर श्री प्रभुपाद की आनंद कोटि वैष्णववृंद की नामाचार्य श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवास आदि गौर भक्तवृंद की श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्यामकुंड राधाकुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की वृंदावन धाम की मथुरा धाम की गंगा मय की यमुना मय की तुलसी देवी की भक्ति देवी की समवेत भक्तवृंद की all glories to the Symbol devotees, all glories to the Symbol devotees, all glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga, all glories to Srila Prabhupada. Okay, all right, my computer screen has gone completely green. Wow. It's powerful. It's still working, but somewhat. All right. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay, reading from chapter 5, text number, let me figure this out, 33. Okay, got it up. Kala Maya Angshayogena Bhagavat Vikshitam Nabhasaha Anushritam Sprasham Vikurvat Nirmame Anilam Kalamayang Sayogena Bhagavad Vikshitam Nabha Nabhaso Shritam Sparasham Vikurvan Nirmame Nilam Kalamayang Sayogena Bhagavad Vikshitam Nabha Nabhaso Nushritam Sparasham Vikurvan Nirmame Nilam Kalamayang Sayogena Bhagavad Vikshitam Nabha Navaso Nusritam Sprasham Vikurvan Nirmame Nilam. Please repeat. Anyone? Mataji's. Kalamayang sa yogena Bhagavatam nabaha Okay, sorry, computers. Okay, Kala, time, Maya, external energy, Angsayogena, partly mixed, Bhagavat, the personality of Godhead, Vikshitam, glanced over, Nabaha, the sky, Navasaha, from the sky, Anusritam, being so contacted, Sparsham, touch, Vikurvat, being transformed, Nirmame, was created, Neelam, the air. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. Therefore, the personality of Godhead glanced over the sky, partly mixed with the eternal time and external energy, and thus developed the touch sensation, from which the air in the sky was produced. Purport. All creations take place from the subtle to gross. The entire universe has developed in that manner. From the sky developed the touch sensation, which is mixture of eternal time, the external energy, and the glance of the personality of Godhead. The touch sensation developed into the air in the sky. Similarly, all other gross matter also developed from subtle to gross. Sound developed into sky, touch developed into air, form developed into fire, and taste developed into water, and smell developed into earth. So Prabhupada gives a purport in text 36, which is pretty much summarizing this little section here. So Matsya Prabhu, I think you're giving class tomorrow. You'll give on the next set of verses. So, Anilopi vikruvana vano nabhraso balana vitaha sasrja rupatan matram jyoti lakshasya lochanam. Thereafter, the extremely powerful air interacting with the sky generated the form of sense perception, and the perception of form transformed into electricity, the light to see the world. Anilena vitam jyotir vikurvat paravikshitam adhatam bho rasamayam kala mayangsa yogataha. When electricity was surcharged in the air and was glanced over by the Supreme, at that time, by a mixture of eternal time and external energy, there occurred the creation of water and taste. Jyotisham bho nusamshishtam vikurvat brahman vikshitam mahim gandha guna adat kalamayangsa yogatah. Thereafter, the water produced from electricity was glanced over by the Supreme Personality of Godhead and mixed with eternal time and external energy. Thus, it was transformed into the earth, which is qualified primarily by smell. Purport. From the descriptions of the physical elements in the above verses, it is clear that the glances of the Supreme, at all stages, the glance of the Supreme is needed with the other additions and alterations. In every transformation, the last finishing touch is the glance of the Lord, who acts as a painter does when he mixes different colors to transform them in a particular color. When one element mixes with another, the number of its quality increases. For example, the sky is the cause of air. The sky has only one quality, namely sound, but by the interaction of the sky with the glance of the Lord, mixed with eternal time and external nature, the air is produced. which has two qualities, sound and touch. Similarly, after the air is created, in interaction of sky and air, touched by time and external energy of the Lord produces electricity. And after the interaction of electricity with the air and sky mixed with time, external energy, and the Lord's glance over them, the water is produced. In the final stage of the sky, there is one quality, namely sound. In the air, two qualities, sound and touch. In the electricity, three qualities, namely sound, touch, and form. In the water, four qualities, sound, touch, form, and taste. And in the last stage of physical development, the result is earth, which has five qualities, sound, touch, form, taste, and smell. Although they are different mixtures of the different materials, such mixtures do not take place automatically, just as the mixture of colors do not take place automatically without the touch of the living painter. The automatic system is factually activated by the glancing touch of the Lord. Living consciousness is the final word in all physical changes. This fact is mentioned in Bhagavad Gita 9.10 as follows: Maya dakshena prakriti suyate sacharacharam hetunanina kaunteya jagat viparivartate. The conclusion is that the physical elements may work very wonderfully to the layman's eyes, but their work actually take place under the supervision of the Lord. Those who can mark only the changes of the physical elements and cannot perceive the hidden hands of the Lord behind them are certainly less intelligent persons, although they may be advertised as great material scientists. Chakshurunitamena tasmai shriram shuchaitanya manavishtam stapitamena putale swayam rupakadamayam dadati swapadantikam vandeham shigro shvetapatakamallam shigrun vaishnavangsha shri rupam sagratam sakana raghunathan vitam tam sajivam sadvaitam savaditam parijana sahitam krishna chaitanya devam shri radha krishna padam sahagana lalita shri vishakhan vitamsha he krishna karuna sindhu dinavanda jagatpati gopisha gopika kanta radha khanda namaste tapta kanchana gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanuste Devi Pranamami Haripriya Panchakalpatarubhasya Kripa Sindhubhya Vichapatyanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namah Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Putale Srimate Bhakti Vikasa Swami Tinam Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prashtaya Putale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Tinam Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharni Nirvisida Shrunivadi Pashyadesh Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Jnananandamayam Devam Nirmaspatikakritam Antharam Sarva Vidyanam Hayagrivam Upasmahe Guru Vaishnava Bhagavan Tinar Smaranohe Vigna Vinashana Nayasha Hai Nija Vanchita Purana. Okay, so as it gets a little bit complicated, here we're describing creations, and obviously there's different processes of creations, as a little bit later in the 10th chapter will be described. Generally, there's the first creation, the second creation. In particular, the first creation is of the Mahatattva. And the second creation is the false ego being generated, in which material ingredients, material knowledge, and material activities arise. Third creation, the sense perceptions are created in the third creation, and from these the elements are generated. The fourth creation is the creation of knowledge and working capacity. So in this particular set of verses, the third creation is described, sense perception, and the elements that arise from that sense perception. And Srila Prabhupada particularly hits on this subject twice in these two purports, of the fact that the gross arises out of the subtle. It's not the other way around. Because basically all of us here, who I think all of us went to school, I hope so, we have been taught pretty much the other way around. That the gross develops, and then from the gross, everything else comes. And that is the philosophy of the scientists that goes back to the Big Bang Theory. Even it is developed from that idea that first the material elements have to be manifest in order for sense perception to arise. For sense perception, or the particular talking about here, the sound and air, touch sensation is developed, such and such is described without even the ingredients particularly becoming manifest yet. So the scientists particularly teach the other way around, that just like we have this, and this is pretty much most well communicated through understanding of abortion nowadays, being that the scientists, or you could say whatever, the biologists within that realm, they define the baby to only be living at a certain stage. It's only considered a human being nowadays. It's considered a tissue beforehand, or whatever they may label it now. I think tissue is like the most non-offensive, most common word that is used in order to promote this abortion. So their idea is that only once a certain level of matter comes together can we designate that this thing is a living thing. This, whatever, clump of, that's another word they use, the clump of matter, or whatever they may say, clump of tissues. Once it develops a heartbeat, maybe, I think that may be the definition now. Now it's a baby. Now it's considered murder. Before that, it's not a murder. It's just some operation that you undergo. So their idea is that life arises out of matter. Their idea is that all of the perceptions and all of these emotions or sensation of touch, and that arises before the arises after the whole creation comes about, after the senses come about, after the heart is beating, after all of these things, after the brain is there. You can only think because you have a brain. That is their idea. But that is disagreed upon by the Vedic knowledge, not just the Vedic knowledge, just by logic. Actually, it doesn't make sense. Because we've been taught that in school, we've accepted it and convinced ourselves that that is the way that things work, that it's gross and then there's subtle. That's more or less what we've been taught, because it's almost like the idea of a robot. They build it and then they program it. Right? The programming may be there from the person, but they have to build the robot first before they can actually put the programming in. So the gross aspects of the robot is built, and then you put the programming in, and then all the programming comes about, and then it can move and such and such. But that's not particularly the case, but that is their vision of what is going on in this world. They compare it to like that of a robot because they don't see it as different, more or less. They see it as matter. What's the difference? Whereas this matter, you could say, they see it as a coincidence, you could say, that it is a singularity. It happened in time, will never happen again. Somehow or rather, by chance it happened, and it will never happen again. Because their idea is, well, there was nothing before, and I don't know what that means at all, because what is nothing? There's no time and there's no space. Then how is there any interaction? And then how is there a singularity that expands into a whole universe? Well, there's no real answer to that. And because they don't have superior knowledge, their knowledge is particularly limited to this understanding. But it doesn't make any sense, actually. Just like we can understand, Srila Prabhupada is saying that from subtle to gross, we can even understand that in our lives, that in order to perform activity, the idea takes up shape within our minds first. Right? Without that, there's no question. And Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, first is contemplation. And then the desire to act, and then arises lust, and then, whatever, anger, frustration, anger, such and such comes about. So without, actually, first is always the subtle aspects of things, and we can even understand that just from our basic lives. And then they may say, well, actually that came from your brain. The scientists may say, well, your brain was there before you could think. Without your brain, how will you think? But actually, it's not true that you need a brain to exactly think. Now everyone's going to like, what the hell? Because this is the conditioning that we have from our science days and from our going to school. You need a brain to think. But it's not true, because we see so many cases of people who are in comas and they're thinking. They're undergoing deep thought. That they often, a lot of them, or there's a particular case in which they performed a heart surgery on this particular famous woman, and by the system there's no brain activity, or there's people who are brain dead. There's no brain activity going on, but when they come out of that coma, they can start to tell you there was so much deep thought going on, dreams and and whatever, so many other things they were seeing. Some of them are actually able to see that particular Mataji, although she was in a state where there was no thought by material calculations, she was able to come out of her body and observe the conversations that were going on with the doctors and describe every single instrument that was being used. So what kind of phenomena is that described within physics and biology? How can you say that? Well, your brain is dead, but then you're still thinking. By material calculation, there's no signals within the brain. The neurons are not firing in order to give rise to proper thought. But there's thought. Why? Because the mind is there. It's subtle. The mind is not the brain. The people, we often even on books, the mind. But actually, that's not the mind. The brain is much more subtle. So, from subtle, the gross arises. But these scientists cannot accept that, because they do not have superior knowledge, or they may have, as Srila Prabhupada says here, they are seemingly knowledgeable, but their knowledge is being stolen by illusion. Why? Because ultimately, they can't understand things beyond their sense perception. Or you could say they choose not to, or they're seeing away from that, because when we start to see in this proper light of knowledge, then it leads to what? Leads to surrender to Krishna. That's what it ultimately comes to, but everybody's trying to avoid that, so then you have to come up with the philosophy which is fully in illusion, because when you actually analyze it, none of it makes any damn sense. But somehow or other, because of the individual conditioned soul's desire to be separate from Krishna, cheaters and the cheated. So those scientists who speak such fallacies in a convincing way, we convince ourselves that's true in order to avoid surrender to Krishna. So the gross material elements first begin at a subtle level. And that particularly more important, more emphasis than all of those things, here Srila Prabhupada is making the point that even those subtle things cannot take place without the sanction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without the Supreme Personality of Godhead being involved within that. He is directing that. He is controlling that. He is the controller. So this the scientists cannot accept. This they cannot see. That actually everything just happening by chance. Srila Prabhupada makes the point. How can two different ingredients mix without the mixer? Without the person who's doing the mixing? Colors is particularly the example that is given here. So we may have different ingredients, different colors, 3 primary colors. But in order to bring about many more colors, or many more qualities within those colors, there has to be the person who mixes those colors. Because without the person, nothing takes place. Without the spirit, without the embryo, you could say, or the tissue, why does it grow? Why doesn't the damn tissue on my arm here grow into a baby? Because this is the individual soul that is pervading that the consciousness pervaded throughout this body. And then there's the individual soul that is there within the womb, and its growth is a symptom of life, that there's a soul within that body. But they cannot accept that. They cannot accept that. Because there's the subtle platform of material existence, but then there's the platform of the soul. As Krishna describes, it's amazing. It's an amazing platform. Some describe it as amazing. Some see it as amazing. Is that yeah. Okay. But some hear it as amazing. Some describing they describe the soul as amazing. So we cannot perceive the soul. Why? Because it is beyond any material instrument. Even the subtle things we can perceive, like sound. How can you? Well, now they can. You can measure sound. But you cannot see sound, as Srila Prabhupada is saying. It has different qualities to it. You cannot see sound. So the soul is not, you cannot see. You cannot see the soul with material eyes. It requires one to develop spiritual vision, one to actually have knowledge, one to actually understand through Shastra Chakshu, that one has to see through the eye of knowledge. So when one sees through the eye of ignorance, because by nature this material world, as by the sanction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is built on ignorance, we won't be able to see beyond that platform. But we become convinced of that because that is the design of it. So the scientists and the philosophers and the logicians, their so-called logic and their so-called so much research, such and such, it fails at basic logic. It fails on the base platform of standard logic. And when especially it fails, not just on the platform of Anuman, on the platform of just logic and reason, but it fails on sense in platform of perception also. On the platform of, what's the word exactly? Pratyaksha. You cannot give evidence. It's all just mental speculation, as Srila Prabhupada emphasizes again and again. These scientists are cheaters. It is only mental speculation. Why? Because when you put it into practice, it doesn't make any sense. You're saying that everything arises out of matter, but do we not ever see a single example of life arising out of matter? Never. Never do we see an example. You cannot give me one example, but you have so much faith that it does a couple of billion years ago from some singularity that exploded. But you cannot give me a concrete understanding or example of how that is even taking place now. Because anything that happens on a larger scale should happen on a smaller scale also. So, just like, the Supreme Personality of God is creating, He is the supreme topmost being, and we can also see that even within our lives. We have a level of control, we have a level of controller, and we can also create. So what happens on a bigger scale should also be going on in a smaller way. Should be able to at least show that. But not only is their logic and reason fallible, it's a fallacy on the level of philosophy, but it's also in terms of practice, in terms of proper perception, it's completely flawed. Just like Srila Prabhupada is saying here, from the subtle comes the gross. And so their ability to do this, the scientists, they can never actually understand material nature. They can actually never come to a proper conclusion because they are bewildered by their base of their knowledge. Because it's already begun at a point where there's no proper reason and sense to it. So Srila Prabhupada says in the purport of the 7th chapter, text 15, but still material energy is very powerful, and the atheist, due to the godless temperament, cannot know how it works. Nor can he know the plan of the Supreme Lord. Under illusion and the mode of passion and ignorance, all his plans are baffled, and as in the case of Hiranyakashipu and Ravana, whose plans were smashed to dust, although they were both materially learned and scientists, philosophers, administrators, and educators. So although they claim to show some level of control and show some level of manipulation within this material world to show, we can understand these things. Actually, they may even create it, understand it, but they themselves are conquered by it. The creator, just like Supreme Personality Godhead, He is the creator of this universe, but He's never touched by it. I'm above it. Oh Arjuna, I'm not influenced by it. I'm the creator. But you can see that they're bewildered by their own creation, the material scientists. They may create so many things, just like they've created these motor cars, but they've put themselves into difficulty by doing that, because now they're taking oil out of the earth and it's causing so many problems in the earth and so many environmental things are going wrong, such and such and such. And then so many other things. They may create the cigarette. They come about and they philosophy, whatever, they create the cigarette, but then they themselves become addicted by it and they ruin their lives. They cannot understand how this material world is working. They cannot understand. They think they understand. Yes, we can control. Yes, we can bring about rain any way that we like by inducing electromagnetic pulses up in the atmosphere, sending up certain drones and then creating electromagnetic thing which invites clouds, and then rain comes about. But they don't understand by that process, they themselves become troubled later by the workings of material nature because they think they are controllers. So they understand to some level the gross workings of material nature because that's the platform they're on. But because ultimately there's a subtler platform that is going on, the workings of material nature, they don't see that by trying to adjust this gross platform or bring about, it's cheating, try to cheat and cut corners and try to bring about enjoyment by some permutation or some manipulation of matter, that they cause themselves so many issues on the subtler platform. Just like we build slaughterhouses and we build porn industries and all of these things for the purpose of gross material pleasure, but it causes a lot of pain on the subtle platform to the mind. The people's minds are completely jacked up. The more they try to enjoy on the gross platform, and they're bewildered. Why is it such? Why is it such? Because you cannot understand even the subtle platform. What to speak of the platform of the soul? What to speak of the personality of Godhead? So one is very distant away from actually understanding what is what, as sometimes Srila Prabhupada says. What is matter, what is spirit, who is the controller of both? They're very distant from that. So they're always bewildered in their endeavors of making progress in this material civilization. Actually, their progress is of no use. Shava eva hi kevalam. It has no use how much progress they make. And if we speak like this to them, they say, you're just dogmatic. You have no idea. Well, you're just saying that because your scripture says it. But again, you can see by pratyeksha, by perception, that their life is for so much advancement, they're still living like dogs in hogs, simply just eating stool of material life. So they cannot recognize the painter. They cannot recognize the one who actually brings about this creation. So they're always bewildered at every step of their life. So the Srimad Bhagavatam presents a science. It's a science from the platform of the soul. It's a much subtler science. So when we look at it externally, sometimes devotees come in from scientific backgrounds, or bhaktas may come in from scientific backgrounds, or may not be a scientific background exactly, but are interested within that realm, and they look at what the Srimad Bhagavatam says and what sometimes Srila Prabhupada says, and think, well, how can I understand this? Well, you can't understand it because there's no, that transformation of consciousness has not taken place. The ability to understand requires us to open up the perception or proper perception of the soul, proper understanding of the soul, proper conclusions that actually we're limited in so many ways. So there's many statements within the Vedas and within the Srimad Bhagavatam which is like, this clearly seems to be against what we learned in school, to be against what science teaches us, to be against mathematics even, right? Like, because in mathematics is very well defined. 1 + 1 is 2. As Srila Prabhupada says, well, 1 minus 1 is 1. Is he wrong? But no, we understand it from a proper platform. Yes, that is correct. So we cannot approach the science of the Srimad Bhagavatam from the platform of the vision of the materialist, of the scientist, or of the philosophers of this world. Because from that platform, the Bhagavatam makes no sense, actually. Because it's a materialistic platform to view it upon. And it is the wrong platform to view it upon. So one has to come up in his consciousness, one has to start to recognize these integral things of life in order to actually understand what the Srimad Bhagavatam is talking about. The sarga, visarga creation, the first creation, second creation, fourth creation, how all this comes about is quite complicated. But one can at least place faith in it when one starts to see Krishna consciousness, when one starts to experience Krishna consciousness, beginning from chanting the holy name, engaging in service, one becomes purified in his senses and his vision, and everything is purified. Then he can start to see how the Srimad Bhagavatam is the conclusion of all knowledge. It is the answer to all questions. It is the topmost knowledge. And how even the science presented within the Srimad Bhagavatam is of perfect science. And then one can study. Then one can start to actually see through these the fallacies of these material scientists, and one can defeat their philosophy very easily, as Srila Prabhupada says. And you can start to understand it, because Srila Prabhupada states this in the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam. He says, for those who study the Srimad Bhagavatam, these cantos, these 12 cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, one should easily be able to destroy atheism or any other philosophy that comes about. Why? Because we're able to understand it from the original cause, the cause of all causes. From the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself, we have perfect knowledge from the beginning. It's not some stuff that we just fluffed up and continue to fluff up as time goes on. So when we have a perfect understanding of something, you can understand, there's a perfect understanding of something, you can understand when there is something that is complete, something's even slightly off. For example, when you have a clean cloth, and even if there's a small spot on it, you can clearly see that and see, there is, some discrepancy here with this, in this whatever, and on this cloth. Similarly, when one has a perfect understanding of the truth, when there is untruth presented, one can easily understand that and destroy that, or point it out, and be able to establish the truth itself. So that is the platform of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It is presenting us knowledge, not just knowledge on the basis of the spirit and it's all spiritual, such and such, but it's also giving us a level of material knowledge of how that material existence comes about. So when we take upon proper study of the Srimad Bhagavatam, of all of these things that are described, these 10 things, sarga, visarga, the different, what are the 10 subject matters? Anybody remember off by head? Huh? Yeah. Manvantaras. Yeah, so all of these 10 subject matters there, I should have brought it up. Sorry. So creation, subcreation, annihilation, such and such. There's 10. In order to qualify under a Purana, these are the things that must be described within that Purana in order to actually be, to qualify as a Purana. So these are in there, they're described very elaborately. And sometimes when we read, especially in the second canto, it's actually done many times, second canto, third canto, multiple chapters within the third canto, fourth canto, fifth canto talks about mangoes that are size of, mountains. And then we've got in the 11th canto, and then some in the 12th canto is also there. So many times, and often when we read these things, we're like God, I have no clue what the hell is going on. And this is what does this relate with my spiritual life, and what does this have to do? But it does, because in order to convince us of the nature of the Srimad Bhagavatam, how it is absolute truth, is to challenge us also to a great level, because what we've been taught in material society is so opposed to, pretty much what the Srimad Bhagavatam describes also. It's almost opposite. Just like we were discussing, from matter, life arises, but we're saying, no, from spirit, matter arises. It's the complete opposite to everything that we've been taught. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is a challenge to our own conditioning, is a challenge to the scientists, is a challenge to the philosophers, in order to establish the supremacy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, of how that knowledge is apaurushaya, of how that knowledge is perfect on all levels. So then we have to develop that vision. We have to see that, we have to study that, we have to understand it. And this can be done when one becomes purified by the proper process of pure devotional service, of trying to perform pure devotional service. Then one does not become agitated when certain statements are made in regards to that which opposes the view of the scientist. Then one doesn't develop doubt in the Vedic literatures. Often in the beginning, even when I came studying physics, and then I hear some statements like gravity doesn't exist from Srila Prabhupada, or that we didn't go to the moon, or the moon is further away than the sun. It's like, well, how do I understand that? Because by material calculation, by study of physics, like when you can calculate the distance of the moon just by the circumference of the earth and the different whatever based on gravitational pull and all of these things really easily. So because of that, you can have this like thing that is set in your mind. But then when you apply simple logic and reason as their whole basis of their philosophy is completely broken on its base, why the hell should I trust these people? What knowledge will they give me when they've completely failed at the basic of things? So when we start to really apply the Vedic knowledge in literature, then we will go away from doubt. As Krishna says, actually, those who do have doubt, their platform of existence is actually ruined. Ashadadhana purusha dharmasyasya parantapa aprapya mam nivartante mrityu sangsara vartmani. What is their position? Mrityu sangsara vartmani. One who doesn't have faith in the Vedic literature, one who doesn't have faith in Dharma. So then one has to establish faith in Dharma, establish faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the Vedic literatures because they come from Him. They are perfect in their descriptions. So Srila Prabhupada attacks on all of these principles. He on purpose attacks on these principles. Cowards don't attack on these principles. Cowards adjust accordingly. But we stand strong on our principles. And Srila Prabhupada said, especially pressing this point that you are rascals, matter comes from spirit, you are rascal. We don't attack on particularly I press on this point, Srila Prabhupada says. If you don't understand this, you've got everything else wrong. So why should we discuss anything else? Why should we discuss anything else? You may point out this and this and this, but I point out your basic problem. Most base thing. Let's discuss that and then we can go higher. But if that is wrong, then you, rascal, you accept what I say. Because if one philosopher is debating against another philosopher and he cannot prove his philosophy or he's defeated in his philosophy, he must accept the other one. Not that you be a coward and run away and believe what you want to believe. So Srila Prabhupada specifically wanted us to press on these points. The gross comes the subtle, from the soul comes from the spirit, matter arises, not the other way around. So we must be strong in this philosophy. We must be strong because we do have the perfect thing. You can go talk to anyone after trying to practice for a few years, studying Srila Prabhupada's books for a few years. You realize how stupid they are. They may be so-called studied, I'm such a philosopher. Wait, what about this? Oh, no, I don't want to discuss that. No, I want to discuss that. Let's start there because that's the base of everything. And so when we can have this proper understanding, then we can start to really establish the siddhanta, really establish the pure truth, because that is our line. We are the preachers of the absolute truth. We're the establishers, trying to establish the knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the lives of those who are bewildered, whose knowledge is stolen by illusion. So then we must be learned. We must understand the ins and outs, how they will try to get away. Because that is the expert nature of the conditioned soul, is to always be able to get out of the ability to surrender, get out of the trap of surrendering to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because the devotees are very expert in doing that. Those who are very close to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they're become expert at doing that. So they naturally want to avoid. Just like anybody who's preached for some time, they're trying to avoid that conversation, and you confront them about it, and they don't want to. And then even if you defeat them, they'll rather just not come and see you again than actually take that discussion up. So then we must be expert in defeating all of their misconceptions and establishing Krishna consciousness as the topmost philosophy, which it is. And therefore these books are so important. Therefore the hearing from the spiritual master, the hearing from the Acharya and from our great Acharyas is so important, because it allows us to establish that faith within our heart by which we can convince others of this also. One can only give that faith if one has it, because if you speak if you don't have that faith and then you speak, oh, maybe this, maybe that, or maybe it's like this. Prabhupada never liked that. I think. Prabhupada never said, I think. What do you mean I think? There is no I think. I don't think. I say what is there. I speak truth. There's no I think it's like this. Prabhupada said, as soon as he says I think, then he is rascal. Then he is a fool. We know. We do not think. We know. So then one must study. Therefore, this book distribution and therefore the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books is so important in order to establish the supreme topmost occupation in human society. It is important. Therefore, it has become the life and soul of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition to distribute this literature, because it propounds the highest truth for the benefit of humanity at large. It can remove that ignorance by which they can actually start to see. So therefore, we should be very determined, Tivrena, as Prabhu was saying yesterday, Tivrena Bhakti Yoga, and very determined in our bhakti yoga. What is that? In distributing this mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that is our bhakti, that is our love to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If you want to, Srila Prabhupada said, you want to get close to Krishna, you struggle in preaching. You struggle in preaching for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That is bhakti, definition of bhakti. Is this book distribution, is this preaching movement, is this Sankirtan movement. So there's so much work to be done. But the real work starts by reading Srila Prabhupada's books, by understanding Srila Prabhupada's books, by living what Srila Prabhupada's books say. And then we can begin to change the hearts of others when we change our own heart. So some of these things are being discussed in terms of subtle to gross and such. And they are important subject matters that we should deeply think about, not just gloss over them because they're a little bit complicated. We should, maybe in the beginning it's a little bit harder, because even when, it's like in the Bhagavad Gita, the 24 elements discussed, I was like, oh my God, what the heck is going on? It's just like, in the first time I read Bhagavad Gita, absolutely no clue what the heck is being talked about. But after a few years, you hear it again and again and again, and you contemplate upon it, and then it starts to kind of stick a little bit. So we should endeavor to understand these things so when people talk to us in all aspects of things, we're like, they're like, okay, these people know what the hell they're talking about. They know, they've got a concrete knowledge. So people can approach us and get the proper result of what everybody desires, that to come to the platform of happiness, to come to the platform of this relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So we're studying and understanding these things in Srimad Bhagavatam class for the reason of the purpose of preaching, a purpose of giving this Krishna consciousness to others, convincing ourselves of it also. I mean, that's the main thing there, and to hear. Establish the Supreme Personality of Godhead within one's heart as an irrevocable fact. But to also be able to defeat those different arguments and philosophies that may come about. So I'll end my class there. If there's any questions or comments, please feel free to ask. Yes, Prabhu.
So, just some little clarification that Prabhupada says 1 minus 1 equals 1. It's in the spiritual world, on the absolute platform. And this has to be stated every time that is stated. Otherwise, we look like big idiots. Because if it's not stated, it can throw everything else out of the window.
Sure.
Regarding the scientists having a basic and fundamental problem that, like you mentioned, that life comes from matter and all this kind of stuff. Okay, so, but then why do they have to accept everything else like this? And the main reason is because we accept the limitations of the senses, the defective nature of the conditioned soul, the four defects. And because once you bring in an authority as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the Creator, then you must accept what He says in the Scriptures. Yet it doesn't mean that we completely say that everything that the imperfect souls discover in the name of science is all wrong. I mean, it's all wrong. There's certain things that hydrogen and oxygen combined makes water.
Yeah.
So we don't deny that, even though that might not be directly stated in Shastra. The main problem is they don't accept the limitations of their senses, and they try to speculate about stuff that is completely beyond their perception, nor do they even accept the fact that their senses could be imperfect, which means that whatever conclusions they would have found could also probably be wrong. Even Prabhupada would go at that. It's like Guru Maharaj also several times said, what I learned in school now is no longer valid anymore. It's all wrong. So that's one thing. Okay, this is a question. Now, Srila Prabhupada is speaking about that nothing happens without the touch of the Lord. The touch of the Lord is causing the transformation of the elements. And it's quite amazing because in modern science they just explain as if everything is just like transforming all by itself. And in fact, to the extent that if you're a faithful person, if you're a theist and you say, wow, God is making this so wonderful. God created nature. Oh, why are you saying, where's God? Now, one way in which we try to explain that is by explaining how the spirit soul's touch must be there to create anything wonderful, as in the case of cars or whatever, cities or airplanes, whatever, Is there any other analogy that Prabhupada or Acharyas have used to explain the touch of the Lord in order to kind of show that? This is one example that came to my mind, but maybe there are other ones I just wanted to kind of ask in that regard.
That's the main one that I know of also. I don't know how else. I mean, it's pretty, that seems like that's like the base of it. So, or the painter. But it's the same. It's the same concept.
It's the same concept, yeah.
Because it's like the idea is that there's a controller and then there's the material elements that need to be controlled. So often Prabhupada would also ask, like, okay, the elements are there, but what is bringing about that? Who's putting them together? That something like the hydrogen and oxygen is there, but how are they just interacting? You can't. How is that coming about? Who created that attraction? Such, and sometimes he would challenge them like that also. But yeah, like the point previously you're saying, an honest thief. That's the platform of the scientists, you could say. And their base level is thief, but then they're honest.
Yes.
So that's how we look at it.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the thief may be honest in some sense, but is a thief at base. So yeah, we are obviously, like I was saying, that at their level of material perception, they're true. I mean, like, they're able to do so many things, and it's to some extent like, okay, wow, the ability. Like, you look at some of these machines, it's like, whoa, that's pretty impressive. But it doesn't go beyond that. So then that's how we see that. That, okay, then you won't be able to understand. You won't be able to understand 1 minus 1 is 1 with that vision. That it's a spiritual vision. It requires that spiritual vision in order to, it's a spiritual understanding. Or like,
it's also true only on the spiritual platform, not on the material platform.
Exactly.
This is very important. Not just the spiritual vision. But it's only true on the spiritual platform, not on the material platform.
So it's important to understand those things. That, okay, 1 minus 1 is on the spiritual platform. So then they can't understand that because they don't have that ability to see that. And so yeah, the honest thieves. Anything else?
I just wanted to mention that the different like scientists and professors and all that can also be impressed and like get a lot from the Bhagavatam, even just in terms of like material science. that one professor who I talk about pretty often, we were showing him this purport in the Bhagavad Gita. Me and another devotee, we were showing him the one that's talking about the soul being in the heart, and the blood corpuscles that go through the heart. So he was looking at that, and he was really impressed because there's such a level of like a high science, very detailed science that's explained even in scriptures that are coming from 5,000 years ago. And he saw, well, at least, I mean, if we look at the Gita, there's also purport that explains how it's millions of years old, but at least as far as they can understand, 5,000 years old. It's impressive. And so he was hearing that the soul is the size of the tip of the hair, divided how many times?
10,000.
1/10,000th the size of the tip of the hair. And then he starts like doing his thinking face that he does. He's thinking really hard, and he goes, so that's actually, he said, 1/10,000th the size of the tip of the hair. He said, that's approximately, and he gave some calculation like this, like many nanometers or something. And he said, that's almost the exact size of the atom, or something like this. And he goes, so how did people back, like all the way back then, know the size of the atom? And so he was really impressed with that. And one just kind of like science thing in this area that we're speaking on that really impressed, or that I find really interesting, is this whole thing with how water forms. It's explained in the Bhagavatam. It comes from fire.
Fire, yeah.
And I was thinking, that doesn't make any sense. How is that possible? But one devotee gave this example, how we actually even see that in science today when people are in laboratories, that you, with a hydrogen and oxygen flame, then water is created. I just looked it up to like verify it, and there's something mentioning this, how you get a balloon, you fill it with hydrogen gas and oxygen gas, and then you light it, and from that the water comes.
That's powerful. Thank you. That's perfect. Yeah, Mason.
Yeah, this is more just it's not. This to I guess for the sake of like scientific preaching. You were talking about like the comatose. Sorry, is this better? You were talking about like for the sake of like when one's in a comatose state, about there being cases essentially
One is
of
no
like
what? I can't hear.
comatose state, and like one essentially like recovering from this, then having like ability to like recall all these vivid details and thoughts that they had, but being in a comatose state doesn't exactly like indicate that there's no connectivity. This is like, I think this is like called like brain death. So as somebody who like might make that point, what could what be
From
like
my
the-
understanding, there is more or less a flat line going on. So it indicates that there's not much function of the brain.
Yeah, I
So
thought
if there's an inhibition of the function of the brain, then like such clarity of thought shouldn't be like so much possible by that means. You know what I mean? Like somebody can describe every little event, well, every little thing. It's like, so what is, your graph shows a healthy brain in which you can think clearly, and these are the things that come out of it. And then your graph shows a brain that is inhibited, its ability is inhibited greatly from some accident or something, but it still can clearly do the same thing.
right.
So then you run into a problem. So what is it actually? How is this actually happening? How can a damaged brain, to a great extent, do the same as one that which is a healthy brain?
Yeah.
So then you can approach that like that also.
Okay. It's just like saying pretty much like essentially like too much overemphasis like on the functionality of the brain. Like essentially is like
Well, if people think that the mind is the brain or something like that's like they confuse that. They don't. There's no idea of a subtler thing, that the brain is just the instrument by which that thought is carried out, but the mind itself is different from the brain, because this is the gross body. The mind continues. The mind and the intelligence, false ego, the subtle material energy continues from one body to another. So this brain is just a product of the gross body. So yeah, it's just okay.
Prabhu, I was appreciating this point you were making about in order to preach properly, we have to hear from the Vedic literature. And if you remember when we visited New Vrindavan some time ago, we met Bhagavatam Prabhu.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a chance to associate with Prabhu when I was in India.
Oh, wow,
And I
nice.
asked him, Prabhu, what is it going to take for us to get the Krishna consciousness movement to the same level of exposure as it was during your time, during Prabhupada's time? And he gave a very profound answer, and he told me 2 words. He said, Shabda Brahma.
Wow.
So you never minimize Srila Prabhupada or reading Prabhupada's books. That's how we'll be able to preach properly, by hearing.
Yeah, it's powerful. Thank you. It's amazing. Okay, Janardhan Krishna Prabhu.
I had a comment and a question on this point that Mason was talking about how there's this scientific understanding about like the brain and like the brain waves. It's amazing how like modern science, it talks about so many of these things as if they're like a fact. But actually, even in the scientific world and understanding, there's no way that they can actually prove how this brain activity or these brain waves results in consciousness. And they call that sort of like the hard problem of consciousness.
Hard problem of consciousness, yeah.
Where they're like, okay, even though I can measure these things and okay, I can see these brain waves and I can see this and I can understand that these neurons are firing here, I can't actually prove how that results in consciousness. And I remember Mahotsa Prabhu was telling me once about how this word, or another definition for the word Maya, means to measure, and how these scientists, they try and say, I can measure all these different things, even in this comatose condition that you were describing and Mason was talking about. They've discovered this like hidden consciousness where if you look on the very small level, there's like still some.
The mimeograph, is that what you use to measure that?
Anyway, they use like a electrocardiogram for the heart and then like a one that does like the brain waves as well. But
you know all about that.
Yeah, but even though they can measure all these different things, even that hidden consciousness that they found was only discovered in 1 of 4 of these comatose patients. But it wasn't just that having that hidden consciousness means they would come out of the coma and they would be conscious, or only those patients could recall certain things that were talked about or discussed. So even though they can like measure and talk about all these things, they still can't prove how those measurements result in consciousness.
That's a good point.
And then the question that I had was, you were, I guess, talking about it in the sense of preaching overall, but specifically like about these points that are like very difficult for people to accept, and how oftentimes when we sort of like push people on these points, they say, okay, you can believe that, I'm just going to believe what I want to believe, and then they sort of just like never want to talk to you again, almost. A lot of the times it's like that, and you were describing that. Is there like scope for, I guess, them first accepting you as a authority and then being able to accept what you say, rather than just like, okay, pushing these people on these points, maybe like make them have faith in you first and accept you as an authority first, or should you just like push them on these points immediately? Like what's like the preaching understanding of that?
I mean,
point?
you have to be intelligent. Probably we're expected to be intelligent about how we do it. Just like somebody comes for the first time to the temple or to a university program, it's not that I'm going to like start pressing them on these points, because that's not the most important thing to think, is to see where that person is at. And then they may even say something that's like a little like off, and you may let it go, because overall you see that this person is a good candidate for surrendering to Krishna, and this misconception they have right now is something that you can't address, because that will lead them to not surrendering to Krishna. So the preacher has to be intelligent in seeing what is to be dealt with and what is not to be dealt with at certain points. That is the intelligence that one has to have. So, yes, I'm talking in the sense that when those topics do come up, we learn it enough to be able to give answers that are convincing. And it may not be, when sometimes we talk about preaching, it's not the Christian style, I'm right, you're wrong. It's you got to learn the art of it, of being seeming like when you talk about it, you're very tactful, but you're very detached from it. The conversation is not so much I'm right. The conversation is driven in asking them questions. You're almost like it's almost like you're inquiring from them. So how do you understand this? And you get them to a point where they just don't know. And they should ask, so what is your thought on this then? Because that's the way to, generally I've seen that's the way to get them to a point where their ego is not hurt. That's the main thing, that when you're speaking to people, you got to work around their false ego. So when you learn how to be expert in that, then you'll be able to convince them of Srila Prabhupada's, the philosophy that is given by the Vedic literatures. Because that ingredient, you could say, which mixes with all of the other things, is all the other ideas, is what causes them to divert away from devotional service. So you have to be expert in getting them to a point where they understand, oh, this is wrong. First step. Not that we're right, because they won't accept that. First, that you are wrong, and so then sometimes I just say, so all this is wrong, so you need to find out what's right. So who are you going to ask? I may not say that, but okay, what are you going to do about it? I'm not going to tell you that. Unless you kind of ask me, I'm not going to exactly tell you. But the idea is that the fact that you've broken their philosophy, it should be natural that they so what is the right thing? It should be a natural reply from their end. If that's not, then you may not preach on that basis, because they may not be ready to accept that yet. So then you continue, because then your conversation may continue in a different direction. Because generally when people don't understand things and they can't discuss things, they won't discuss it. So you may bring them to a level of just, all right, I'm wrong, but I just don't want to go in a different direction. Let's just move on. And then you may turn it light, and I joke with them. I often poke him sometimes. I say, oh, you think you're this, and you think you know so much, but actually, and I'll make different jokes throughout the conversation for the rest of the conversation. But it's just kind of, you have to see like that. It's not just like we're right. It's like, hey, like everything has to be for them on the level of logic and reason almost. And that's why, again, with the Christians, it's the same. It's like we don't argue. Anytime they bring up scripture now, they say, I don't want to argue on that. If you want to talk about that, don't talk to me. If you want to argue on logic and reason, I'm here. And but you have to be logical. Okay. Is that all right? Yes. Is there any questions from the Matajis? Yes. Shubhada Mataji?
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Yes,
my question is, many times devotees speak on tangential terms in classes.
Sorry, what was that?
So when do we...
I didn't hear, because your mic is...
Hare Krishna.
They speak on what?
Many times devotees speak on tangential terms in classes. So when do we get to understand how sound develops into sky and so on?
So, sorry, it's like, so tangential terms in classes, and then what was the question?
So how do we understand that the sound develops into sky and so on?
How does sound develop into sky? And I haven't particularly thought. Just like how does the question came? Why is the false ego in transformation with the mode of goodness, in touch with the mode of goodness, create the mind? Do you know what this is? This sound to sky? It's the ether.
The Mahatattva is present, and when you can even see this when you push sound on a particular object.
It vibrates. Yeah, sure.
So when sound is, that element is acting upon the Mahatattva, the certain element of the sky is activated.
Yeah, but yeah,
That's just how it works.
yeah. It's a function of the.
But it affects the Mahatattva in a particular way. Sky is.
Okay, so it's just it's interaction with the Mahatattva. That's the answer. That's what the verse says.
You can even see that, like even if sound, creates vibration and like different shapes and all this come about if you actually know how to use sound.
Yeah.
So similarly, like the Supreme Personality of Godhead, being the best engineer and the best everything, he knows that this particular sound creates this particular out of the Mahatattva.
So over the sky mixed with eternal time. That's developed. Yeah. So the sound is the first. Right after the false ego comes the sound. Yeah. So there you go. Does that make sense? Maybe not. Maybe it's not completely understandable like that.
I mean, some things that you can.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's how it's stated there also, that the Mahat, it's just a mixed. So, yeah, it's a little more, that's where you gotta just trust, is that that's the process. That's the process of creation. Why does hydrogen and oxygen create, why does it make water? Well, this is the two ingredients mixed, and that's what it creates. Yeah. Okay, what time is it? 9:01, okay. One more question and from the Matajis, I think she had, and then we'll go. Mataji, Degrashavanti Mataji.
It was just a comment, actually, about, so Prabhupada's, an analogy that Prabhupada also would give, and it's about a rose. The rose in the garden gradually takes its shape and color to become beautiful and sweet, not by blind physical law, although it appears like that. Behind that physical law is the direction of the complete consciousness of the Supreme Lord.
Sure. Okay, Hare Krishna. All right. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yeah, I know. I know how it works. But the question comes like, in order for sound to propagate, so space is required. That's the. It's yeah. It's manifest from the Mahatattva. All of the things there.
Namo Kincana Vistana